welcome to today's show. So we're kind of continuing from our last podcast that we covered on religion's role in the sexual abuse of our children globally. So today we're going to be talking about religion's role in global armed conflict. Now, as you guys heard from our last episode, we had a direct appeal to the United Nations to implement the Declaration of Human Rights, Articles 19, as well as some other legal international laws to protect our children and our women. On this particular episode, we're going to be talking about mainstream religion's role in war, genocide, and terrorism, not just today, but also in the past. And of course, at the very end of the show, as we normally do, is our direct appeal. So we're going to go ahead and just jump right into the episode. So religion, war, genocide, and religion's involvement in war, genocide, and terrorism. So the spike in religious violence is global and obviously affects virtually every religious group. A 2018 Minority Reports group indicated that mass killings and other atrocities are increasing in countries both affected and not affected by war alike. So while bloody encounters are recorded in over 50 countries, most reported lethal incidences involving minorities were concentrated in Syria, Iraq, Nigeria, India, Myanmar, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. Hostilities against Muslims and Jews also increased across Europe, as did threats against Hindus in more than 18 countries. Making matters worse, 55 of the world's 198 countries imposed heightened restrictions on religions, especially Egypt, Russia, India, Indonesia, and Turkey. Now, according to PEW research article, which was published in 2018, Islamic extremists waging global jihads and power struggles between different factions of Muslims in the Middle East, to also the persecution of Muslims in Myanmar. The outbreak of violence between Christians and Muslims across Africa is also to be noted. Now, according to PEW, more than a quarter of the world's countries experienced a high incident of hostilities motivated by religious hatred, mob violence related to religion, terrorism, harassment of women, and the harassment of women was mainly based on them violating religious codes. So if you go back even to the 1930s, there was a pamphlet published by a rationalist press association, and it included this quote from historian Bertrand Russell, which I included because I think there is a lot of truth to what he stated in 1930. And this is what he said about religion. He said, "Religion prevents our children from having a rational education. Religion prevents us from removing the fundamental causes of war. Religion prevents us from teaching the ethic of scientific cooperation in place of the old fierce doctrines of sin and punishment. It is possible that mankind is on the threshold of a golden age. But, if so, it will be first necessary to slay the dragon that guards the door. And this dragon is religion." Now, there's a lot of truth to what he is saying, because religions have backed some of the most bloodiest and evil conflicts in the world. And so let's actually jump right into that. Now, it's become a well-established fact in modern history that wars, genocide, and terrorism have been backed and supported and carried out by both the religiously devout as well as religious extremists. Now, to be noted, when you hear the term religious wars during any part of this broadcast, it refers to wars that have a religious goal, claim as a spiritual reward for violence, and is authorized and condoned by a religious leader. So perhaps the most globally recognized religious war, at least in the U.S., of the 20th century, was carried out by the Nazi Germany Party, in cooperation, and I'll state this with significance, in cooperation with the Vatican Church. Now, I'll break down those facts in a second. Now, it should be interesting to note that the legitimate authority of a holy war is not the government of state, but the church. So I'll say that again. The legitimate authority of a holy war is not the government of a state, but the church. And that's why they are called holy wars. And I'm going to go ahead and just make a note while I'm doing this podcast, because I need to go back and make sure that that word is accurately specified in this article on courtmagazine.org. So, now, as was in the case of the Third Reich, back to the Nazi Party, right? The Nazi Party engaged in crimes against religious minorities, including Jews, Gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, and others, resulting in an estimated death of some 6 million, were both instigated and supported by the Vatican during its beginnings. And so the Nazi Party, when they first, started, they needed support. They needed some momentum, and they needed some big support to get to really establish themselves as, the new party in Germany. And for that, they turned to the Vatican and were greatly supported by the Vatican Church initially. As documented in the Catholic Church in Nazi Germany by Genscher Louis, the Nazi Nationalist Coalition came into power on March 5th, 1933, winning 52% of the vote. And on March 13th, the priest Pius, Cardinal Faulhaber, publicly praised Chancellor Adolf Hitler for the stand he had taken against communism. Now, I'll say it again. The Cardinal Faulhaber publicly praised Chancellor Adolf Hitler for the stand he had taken against communism. Prior to this, the Holy See had been working to establish a concordat between them and Germany that involved maintaining control over religious schooling, assets, and the like. So the Holy See was actually trying to work on a concordat with Germany, but they were unable to because of, the communist power that was in Germany. So when Hitler took over, the Holy See was like, yay, we can now finally get this concordat that we've been dying to get, that we couldn't get under the old regime. So, again, negotiations for the Concordat had failed in the past due to the former German party being predominantly non-Catholic. However, with the rise of Hitler, who was Catholic, I don't know if you guys know that, Hitler was Catholic, the Holy See saw a new opportunity for negotiations and were even willing to implement new strategies to obtain them. Now, the Vatican's use of Hitler's regime had immediate policy advantages. So, first of all, when the law announced on February 27th, it recognized 7 Catholic feast days as now legal holidays. A lot of people didn't know that. So again, once Adolf Hitler came into power, he recognized 7 Catholic feast days as legal holidays. They became legal holidays in Germany. For that reason, although having placed limits on the Nazi Party under the old regime, the Vatican made a momentous reversal. And on March 24th, the Catholic Church hastily removed restrictions they had placed on the Nazi Party in a letter written by Cardinal Bertram that addressed members of the Fulda Bishop Conference. So the Vatican had approved Bishop Bertram's stance on removing prohibitions formerly placed on the Nazi Party, and they welcomed them into the church. Hitler saw this as a great diplomatic opportunity to establish a strong relationship with Rome, and he worked to establish the Concordat. Now, the Vatican now saw a unique opportunity to use the Nazi political power to carry out their own religious agenda, and were even willing to implement and support the extermination of the religious minorities to achieve their religious ends. Now, leading many to see what was noted in history as one of the greatest atrocities of the century was in fact instigated, supported, and facilitated by one of the most powerful religious organizations of the world, the Vatican Church. And with the backing of the Vatican, there was now nothing to stand in Hitler's way to gain world domination by employing Vatican-supported and inspired tactics to exterminate any religious opposing or entity standing in its way. And we're going to get into the facts. At the meeting of the Bavarian Council of Ministers on April 24, 1933, the Premier was able to report that Cardinal Faulhaber had issued an order to the clergy to support the new regime in which he, Faulhaber, had confided. A declaration of the Catholic Teachers Organization published on April 1st encouraged its members to participate in building the new order and to be helpers and friends to the nationalist movement. Now, when German Minister Papen and Göring of the Nazi Party visited the Vatican on April 10th, they were received with great honor. The Catholic Allegium, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this correctly, but I'm going to spell it for you. The Catholic, I think it's called, again, I'm not even going to try it. It's Allgemeine, and then it's Rundschau, the Allegium I don't know where that is. Well, anyways, this is what they concluded. That's the name of their organization. They concluded that the bishops cannot fight where Rome has concluded peace. I'll read that again. This Catholic organization concluded that the bishops cannot fight where Rome concludes peace, indicating that the Vatican and Rome had fully supported Hitler's regime. Now, when Jehovah's Witnesses were suppressed in Bavaria on April 13th, the church, that's the Catholic Church, on assignment from Hitler's Ministry of Education, reported any members who were seen or thought to be still practicing the new forbidden faith. So the Catholic Church even supported Hitler when Hitler was looking for Jews and Jehovah's Witnesses and gypsies. He actually used the Catholic Church to be like his kind of lookout. So they were supposed to report anybody who was still practicing the forbidden faith. In other words, anyone who was not Catholic. So as Hitler fulfilled his role as executioner of religious minorities and began operating his notorious concentration camps and gas chambers, members of the Catholic faith were being persuaded to continue to suppress emotional sympathies. Now, on April 3rd, 1938, a papal who had assumed the title Protector founded an organization named Kazar ud Alder, or Cross and Eagle, to appeal to German Catholics to join in the creation of the Third Reich that personified the God-given mission of the German nationalists to deepen Christian conservative thinking. Now, the Papen was clear on his purpose to use the Nazi Party for its own religious corrupt means and made this eyebrow-raising statement. Here's what he said. Success is not tied to the existence of political parties, which, according to him, would not last. So his point was that political parties don't mean anything. It's important for you to just keep the church's interest. So that was his main objective in supporting the Nazi Party was church interest should come first. Church interest should come first. So for Hitler's fourth birthday party on April 20th, 1935, Monsignor Kaas sent a telegraph of congratulations from Rome that was published in the press. So obviously that came straight from the Vatican. So they said, for today's birthday, sincere good wishes and the assurance of unflinching cooperation and the great enterprise of creating a Germany internally united, enjoying social peace and externally free. Now, Cass, who wrote from Rome, was expressing the well wishes of the Holy See, as they called themselves. The bishop, it goes without saying, rendered the state and the authority what, according to God's commandment, is their due. This is a quote. The church has done this under earlier forms of government, and she would do the same under the present one. She would urge the faithful to be obedient and respectful. The bishop gladly recognized that the new state promoted Christianity, raised the level of morality, and fought the battle against godlessness with vigor and success. So this is their quote that they had stated. Now, during that meeting, Hitler spoke on the long-standing view of the church, as well as their views on Jews, as viewing Jews as parasites, pointing to the fact that the church had banished them to the ghettos. He reaffirmed his stance against them and mentioned that he was only going to do what the church had done for 1,500 years. And so one thing I think I failed to mention was that, when Hitler did actually meet with the Holy See, when he actually had a meeting, with the Vatican, he was letting the Vatican know that we view Jews as parasites. We're going to send them to the ghettos. And we're only going to take a stand against them that you have already done for the past 1,500 years. So how did the Vatican respond to that? Let me state this first. As devout Catholics, Hitler affirmed that he was personally convinced of the great power and significance of Christianity, and he would not permit the founding of another religion. A statement that at the time went unchallenged by the Holy See. So when the Holy See heard him say that, they didn't say nothing. It was like, oh, silence. So they didn't say stop. They didn't say, no, you shouldn't do that. They didn't say, hey, you're going a little too extreme. Back up. They were silent. But what does silence mean? If you hear somebody say something, they're hearing out, they're in your neck of the woods, they're in your corner, telling you how they view Jews, telling you what they're going to do to them. They told you. He told you what he was going to do. And the Holy See did not challenge him one bit. That's fact. Okay, you guys, that is fact. That's history. period. So from such statements, it's clear that the Catholic Church, in accordance to Vatican approval, were instrumental in orchestrating, facilitating, and implementing the genocide and execution of Jews, Gypsies, Jehovah's Witnesses, and other religious minorities who did not adhere to the supreme power and doctrine of the Catholic faith. And here's why I say it was with their approval. They didn't challenge it. So if you don't challenge something and you hear what's going to be done through your church, by the way, because Hitler was what? He was what again? He was Catholic. They knew that. So what was Hitler going to use when he went back to Germany? He was going to use the Catholic Church to carry out his means. They didn't challenge it. So what did he do? He began to implement his extreme actions against any who were not Catholic, as he told the Catholic Church he was. They didn't say not to. They didn't challenge him. So pretty much, there was a go-ahead for him. Archbishop Gober, in response to an inquiry at the Vatican, had also been told that a concordance between the Reich and the Holy See had been discussed in the talks with Papen and Gordon. So how did the Vatican escape retribution along with Hitler and the regime when it fell in 1945? That's what I want to know. Wait, so y'all, the whole world saw the Vatican support him, send him birthday wishes and all that. And so when he fell, how come the Catholic Church didn't fall with him? Well, here's probably what happened. Perhaps in part due to the fact that Hitler and the Catholic bishop only met publicly on a few occasions. So, it wasn't like the bishops were always, eating with him publicly. That only happened on a few occasions. Now with the death of the pious who was in control when he first took power in 1939, Hitler sought to influence the vote of the next pope, who would be more favorable to his policies. Now, after taking control, the second pope remained, not the second pope, but the second pope during Hitler's reign, remained politically neutral and chose not to use his influence to ruffle the feathers of Germany in the interest of the church in Germany. So when the next pope took control, he did not use his influence to stop Hitler from what he was doing. He decided to remain neutral because he did not want to negatively impact the church in Germany, although he saw that what Hitler was going crazy. He was going extreme and, hurting people, but the Pope was neutral. How can you remain neutral when you know that someone is using, quote unquote, your church, to carry out these acts and atrocities against mankind, against humanity? You can't. That's impossible to remain neutral when they're using your church. So, although he said he remained neutral, he wasn't neutral. You can't remain. It was your church. It belongs to you. It's under your jurisdiction. So there was no neutrality. That was support. They said they remain neutral, but you can't remain neutral on something if they're using your church to do it. It's all right. You're not neutral anymore. Hello. So, but he didn't say nothing. So he said, "Oh, I'm remaining neutral." No, you weren't. So, in his first episcopal, Summi Pontificus on the unity of human society released a statement in October of 1939, and Pius urged church members internationally, including Germany, to remember a quote from Jesus. And this is what he said in 1939, you guys, okay? He said, "Render therefore Caesar the things that are Caesar's." So, in other words, when this new pope took power, He sent a quote out to the church members in Germany to remember Caesar's things to Caesar. So he was pretty much telling church members that they were expected to obey the laws of the land, even if it meant carrying out the execution of religious minorities, which would soon commence in the following months of his new appointment. So he told them, the new pope told them, hey, you stay obedient to that church. And had the nerve to use the Bible as a quote, had the nerve to use Jesus. Now, here's why I say had the nerve to use Jesus. Now, it's important to know that the Bible does not, and Jesus never encouraged his disciples to obey government leaders at all cost. Never. Because in that same quote, Jesus continued, but render God's things to God, meaning that in the event that a government asked members to disobey God's commandments, the disciples were expected to give priority to obedience to God and not the church, not the state rather, which for Jesus' disciples involved loving their enemies, not killing them. So there were always, Jesus Christ never encouraged his followers to just, support governments at all costs. So the Vatican at that time never directly condemned Hitler, his policies or practices. Even when Hitler began to use gas chambers starting at the end of 1939, the Vatican was silent. Silent, you guys. Silent. They said that they were neutral. How are you going to be neutral when they're using your church to do it? Of course, by this time, war had nearly engulfed the world as the Vatican passed intel between countries to help them escape from a problem that they themselves helped create and facilitate and instigate at the start of Hitler's regime. So other countries, because Hitler was now set on world domination, so Hitler said, I'm going to start invading all these other places and countries and stuff. And so the Vatican was like, okay, well, we'll be intel for you guys. We'll tell you guys what we hear, and we'll try to help you guys escape, when Hitler, when he comes or whatever, or try to help you, survive or whatever. But they were doing that in the background. They still were not confronting Hitler on what he was doing. They did not condemn him publicly. You're not neutral anymore, buddy. You're not neutral if he's using your church. So the Vatican, with the eyes of the world watching, were still unwilling. I didn't tell you guys this part. Let me tell you guys this part before I move into that part. All right. So on September 26, 1943, here's what happens. Okay, because, Hitler was, taking over the world. That's what he thought. Nazi officials demanded the Jewish leaders in Rome 50 kilograms of they demanded from the Jewish leaders in Rome, 50 kilograms of gold within 36 hours. Otherwise, they would send 200 Roman Jews to the concentration camps. So, Nazi came into the Vatican. He said, well, I'm taking over everything. I'm coming to the Vatican too. So he was in Rome with the Vatican and told the Jews in Rome, listen, if y'all don't give me all this gold, 200 of y'all are going to the concentration camps, period. Did the Vatican say anything then? No. They were silent. The Vatican, with the eyes of the world watching, here's what the Vatican did do though. The Vatican, with the eyes of the world watching, they did not offer the money to the Jews without cost. They instead offered the Jews an open-ended loan in the amount they needed to pay the Germans. So instead of the Vatican stepping in and saying, no, Hitler, you think you're doing too much, stop. What they did was they said, well, let's give a loan to the Jews who are about to die. First of all, why don't you just give them the money? Like, why are you going to give them a loan? Who does that? Like, they're about to die, and you give them a loan so that they don't die? Who does that? And then, number two, you don't even tell Hitler to stop. Who's doing this? He's doing this for the Catholic Church. Y'all don't say that? You're silent? What? So after the money was paid, right? So they paid. So they paid all the Jews, regardless of sex, age, health. They were still rounded up and sent to concentration camps. The number of them that were deported was 1,015, and out of the 1,015 that were deported, only 16 of them survived the war. So Hitler still wiped them out. He still killed them, and the church didn't say anything when he rounded them up either. They were silent. And who was Hitler doing it for? Who was he doing it for? The Catholic Church. Why do people forget that history? I'm like, how is that possible to forget that history? Those are facts. The estimated number of Jews that were killed during the Holocaust is between 5.8 million to 11 million. However, some experts say that number may be significantly higher. That's just an estimate, you guys. In other countries occupied by the Germans, Jews underwent conversion of faith, becoming Catholics to avoid persecution. While some claim that the Catholic Church was directly responsible for saving hundreds of thousands of lives during Hitler's anti-Jewish campaigns, others note that the Catholic Church, who supported and solidified Hitler's rise to power, is responsible not only for the lives lost of the millions persecuted, including the Jews, but that they are also by extension responsible for the 75 million lives lost during World War II. You hear that? Some are like, oh, good. Thank you so much, Catholic Church, for saving hundreds of thousands of lives. But wait a minute. Aren't you guys the ones who put the world in the position in the first place? Aren't you indirectly responsible for World War II by giving so much support and love and power to Hitler and not condemning him initially, even when he started making those gas chambers? So some people say, oh, no. They're responsible for the entire war. 75 million lives lost. Soldiers and civilians. So despite many Jewish leaders, and here's what I don't get. This makes no sense. Despite many Jewish leaders praising the second Pope, for his help in aiding the Jews during the Holocaust. The reality is that the Vatican played a major role in the establishment of the Third Reich, never publicly condemning their religious intolerance and persecution, and only began helping Jews once the problem extended outside the walls of Germany and began impacting church interests in other countries. That is the only time that they actually got involved, is when they saw that church interest was being impacted negatively in other countries. Then they jumped in. Then they said that they were going to now get involved. It's too late. It's too late now to say that you're now advocating and supporting and helping, when now it's too late. It's already responsible. It's already led to millions of deaths. So perhaps the new Pope, he was motivated by understanding, and in the light of what took place, when tons of explosives were dropping on Rome. Maybe this is going to help you guys understand that this new Pope who came into power during Hitler's regime was not who you guys think he was. So here's what happened. Okay, so when the bombs started going off in Rome in 1943, the Americans were dropping bombs. So what did the Pope do? As soon as the all clear had sounded, in other words, it's all clear, everybody's okay now, bombs have stopped dropping. What's the first thing that you think this Pope did? You think he went to the people and said, you guys, everybody, just checking everybody, are you guys okay? How are you feeling? Is everybody safe? No. First thing he did after the all clear had sounded is he went straight to the Vatican bank to withdraw cash reserves before driving into the city. He went and got some money. He went straight to the Vatican bank. Who does that? Like, you're supposed to be the moral, spiritual leader of your people. But again, makes sense. Because even at the onset of Hitler's regime, the Catholic Church was all about preservation of themselves and support of the Catholic Church. So these are sins that the Vatican has never apologized for and can never atone for. Like, there's nothing you can do to ever atone for, 75 million deaths of World War II? How do you apologize for that? Yeah, you can't. So I kid you not, that could be just an episode in itself, but we about to go in some other people as well. We're not stopping with the Vatican. Let's go to Russia for a second. Now, a more recent example of mainstream Christian religions inciting violence and intolerance towards religious minorities is in Russia. Now, although Russia claims to not have a religion of state, the Russian Orthodoxy is the most widely possessed and protected faith throughout the Russian Federation, representing some 75% of the population. Now, without going into the long-standing of history of Russia, because Russia has a crazy long history, we are going to specifically focus on examples of religious violence and intolerance under President Vladimir Putin, just because it's more recent. Now, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Pentecostal congregations, and the Evangelical Christian Missionary Union reported that local authorities in recent years denied them permission to acquire land on which to construct places of worship. Authorities continue to deny construction permits to several groups, including Catholics, Buddhists, Muslims, and Jews. Now, I need to make a note, you guys, because actually in this article that I wrote, it doesn't say Buddhist, it says buddies, which looks absolutely ridiculous. So we need to go back and fix that. So according to Elizabeth Cassidy, she's the Director of Research and Policy at the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. She said that the Russian government maintains, frequently updates, and enforces an array of laws that restrict religious freedoms, adding that, and she says this, she says, Jehovah's Witnesses, who were banned as extremists by the Russian government in 2017, are among the groups most brutally targeted under these laws in recent years, as praying, preaching, dissemination of materials outside designated places of worship are often prohibited. Now, in 2021, they actually completely banned the religion now. Now the whole religion's banned. Some of the members have been tortured, held into prisons for things including not being willing to kill and not being willing to fight in war, sharing their Bible-based beliefs, and other, meeting in places of worship. I think the most recent report that I heard was like some 70-something-year-old woman has now a criminal case and has to go to prison soon because she's, preaches. So, yeah, that's Russia for you. Now, since the implementation of the anti-terrorist laws, the level of surveillance of all non-Orthodox Christian churches has increased. As a result, Christian activity is often under state surveillance, and church services are sometimes raided by security forces. Christian converts in Muslim Muslim regions face immense pressure from family, friends, and local communities to renounce their faith, and out of fear, converters often do not even attempt to go to church meetings. Some have been forced to flee and find refuge in safe houses. Now, according to OpenDoorUSA.org, that also reports that at least 14 Christians recently were arrested, including 4 Christians who worked in a rehabilitation center for drug addicts and were sentenced to 5 to 8 years of imprisonment. It's clear that from the aforementioned examples, the Russian Federation, under the direction and support of the Russian Orthodox Church, are an impediment to tolerance, human rights, and global progress. And so there's a lot going on in Russia right now. So Russia is not only advocating their Russian Orthodox Church, but they're also persecuting all the religious minorities in their jurisdiction. That's happening 2021, you guys. So let's move on to Islam. Whew. All right, September 11, 2021, right? This is probably the biggest one you guys are going to remember. Will forever be a turning point in human history, for it was the day that Islamic extremists, under the belief of religious purity, waged their holy war against a predominantly Christian U.S. nation. And while many will argue that Islamic extremists bear no reflection of the true teachings of Islam, and they say that radicals are the minority, the fact remains that radical religious teachings and influences have the greatest impact for harm on the world affairs of today. So in other words, even though a person may say I'm a Muslim extremist, it's those extremists that still have the potential to do the greatest harm to the world. So on September 11th, on a clear late summer morning, Islamic Muslim hijackers used jet airliners as destructive weapons, targeting the New York City World Trade Centers and the United States Pentagon. Now at 8:46 a.m., Flight 11 hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At 9:03 a.m., Flight 175 crashed into the Southern Tower, eventually causing both towers to collapse, which resulted in massive damage to the rest of the complexes and nearby buildings. Now, some 2,595 people inside and near the towers were killed, along with 157 people who were aboard the flights. Now, at 9:37 a.m., the hijacked American Airlines Flight 77 sliced through 3 light poles in a Pentagon parking lot before slamming into the first floor of the building and exploding in a fireball, instantly killing 125 people inside the Pentagon, plus all 64 passengers on board the flight, including the 5 hijackers. Now, at 9:28 a.m., 4 hijackers attempted to gain control of the United Airlines Flight 93. Passengers and crew who were on board the hijacked aircraft fought back. So on 9/11, millions of Americans were glued to their television watching in horror. We remember where we were. I don't remember where I was when those hijacked planes attacked the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. So First Officer Leroy Homer, and I will say this, he managed to transmit on the ground shouting, "Mayday, Mayday, get out," over the radio amid sounds of violence. So Cleveland Air Traffic Control replied back, but was met with radio silence. Nearly 3,000 people died as a result of that, of that religiously inspired propaganda. The victims were not just the 3,000 people who died from the attacks, but it included the 33,000 police officers, firefighters, first responders, and community members who had to be treated for injuries and sicknesses related to the attacks. Not to mention the scores of friends and family and community members who've been emotionally impacted and devastated by that crime against humanity. And so we're talking, and it still impacts people today, right? People are still suffering from that attack here in the U.S. And again, how did that happen? Who backed that? They were Muslim extremists, people who professed to follow the Muslim faith, but who took it to the extreme. And Hitler, right? Hitler, I'm a Catholic, and again took his faith to the extreme, and that's the issue. And the issue about is what you're seeing is that you're seeing that these mainstream religious organizations, they're going to have extremists, and these extremists are going to continue to assault the world as a whole and have a negative impact on the peace and security of the world. We get the message. So let's go to Africa. More recently, in 2020, an Islamic group killed some 50 during a massacre in Mozambique and killing dozens of villagers. In the most bloodiest attack, it says more than 50 people were massacred in the attack, and it's horrible. Most were either shot, dead, or they were beheaded. But we're not done. You guys, give me 1 second because my computer's about to go out, and I do not want it to die while I am finishing this report. Okay, plugged in, power. Yes, we have power. All right, let's go to Bangladesh. Now, presently in Bangladesh, Hindus are targeted by the government that is placed in their constitution. Islam is the religion of their state. So Bangladesh says, no, Islam is our religion of state. So during the 1971 Bangladesh genocide, there was widespread killings and acts of ethnic cleansing of civilians in Bangladesh, then East Pakistan, a province of Pakistan. And widespread violations of human rights were carried out by the Pakistani army, which was supported by the political and religious militants during the Bangladesh Liberation War. Now, in Bangladesh, the atrocities are identified as a genocide. Now, according to Time magazine report, the Hindus who accounted for 3/4 of the refugees and a majority of the dead have borne the brunt end of the Muslims' military hatred. The genocide led to some 3 million Hindus being killed by one estimate. Now, according to R.J. Romo, professor of political science at the University of Hawaii, the genocide and genocidal atrocities were also perpetuated by lower-ranking officers and ordinary soldiers. These willing executioners were fueled by an abiding anti-Bengali racism, especially against the Hindu minority. Bengalis were often compared with monkeys and chickens. Said General Nazi, it was a low-lying and low-lying people. The Hindus among the Bengalis were as Jews to the Nazis, scum and vermin that should be, at best, exterminated. Soldiers were free to kill at will. The journalist Dan Coggan quoted one Pakistani captain as telling him, "We can kill anyone for anything. We are accountable to no one. This is the arrogance of power." So how have things changed for Hindus in Bangladesh since then? Well, according to the BJHM report in 2017 alone, at least 107 people in the Hindu communities were killed, and 31 fell victim to enforced disappearances. Some 782 Hindus were either forced to leave their country or threatened to leave. Besides, 23 were forced to get converted into other religions. At least 25 Hindu women and children were raped, while 235 temples and statue vandalizings had happened that same year. The total number of atrocities happened with the Hindu community in 2017 amounted to 6,474. That was in 2017, you guys. Now, during the 2019 Bangladesh elections, 8 houses belonging to Hindu families were set on fire. And in April of 2009, 2 idols of Hindu goddesses were vandalized by unidentified individuals, and there was some more temple desecrations. And although freedom of religion is documented to be guaranteed in the Bangladesh Constitution, it is obviously not enforced. And these aforementioned cases of the religious bigotry in Bangladesh continues to threaten the eternal peace and human rights throughout that region. So, and again, these are people who predominantly say they're Muslim, right? So not only is Muslim extremists, responsible for terrorism, you also have just people of the Muslim faith and other countries who use their religion as a weapon to assault the religious minorities in their particular countries. Africa, and we just told it, just shared the story about Africa as well as in Bangladesh. And so there you have it. Those are the facts. All right, we're not done. I'm about to go in. What about Buddhism? Now, most people think, Buddhism, it's a way of peace. It's so nonviolent. Well, that stance has long since been forgotten and abandoned. In the 20th and 21st centuries, Buddhism is not a way of peace. Here's an example. In Sri Lanka, for example, the 20th century civil war between the mostly Buddhist majority and the Hindu minority cost some 50,000 lives. Now, more than 100,000 military and civilian Hindus were killed after the rise to power of a new Sri Lanka leader, and were pressured to conform to Buddhism nationwide by Buddhist monks. So Buddhist monks had forced and pressured Hindu civilians to become Buddhist or else. So in 1956, the non-Buddhist speaking population was actually 30% of administrative services, 50% of clerical services, 60% of engineering, and doctors, 40% of armed forces. So by 1970, those numbers have plummeted. So only 5% are administrative, 5% are clerical, 10% are engineers and doctors, and 1% make up the armed forces, respectively. So that's the situation today. So those individuals who are not Buddhist and who reside in Sri Lanka are not only treated harshly, and they are also denied positions of influence and denied educational opportunities because of their religious beliefs. So we can see clearly today the situation is no better. So in that region, Buddhists have been responsible for bombings of Christian churches on Easter and attacks on mosques, Muslim-owned businesses, and homes. So those of you who thought Buddhism was a way of peace, you're over here, what do you guys over here, I say it's very popular in the U.S. People, what do? They do the yoga thing, Bajiggy. And, they do the meditation thing, the Buddhist meditation thing, thinking, oh, it's a way of peace. No. You guys are not in possession of the facts. Buddhism is not a way of peace. Has not been a way of peace for at least 100 years. So, think I'm lying. I just gave you one example. Let's go to Myanmar. All right. So Myanmar is a Buddhist state who has used religion to instigate some of the most bloodiest atrocities in the 21st century by far. One such case involves thousands of Muslims that have died and more than 700,000 that had to flee to Bangladesh during an army crackdown in 2017. Now, these Muslims, who numbered around 1 million in Myanmar at the start in 2017, are one of the many ethnic minorities in the country. These Muslims are also targeted. Their communities are targeted, and it's horrible. The Myanmar government denies them citizenship, refuses to recognize them as a people, and sees them as illegal immigrants from Bangladesh. So waves of persecution against these Muslim refugees who had to leave, they had to flee from Myanmar, and they had to run back to Bangladesh over this past decade. The latest exodus that I have documented happened in 2017 of August after the militants and insurgents had gotten into, a huge situation. So, anyways, when those Muslims had to flee to Bangladesh and they actually finally made it, they had to flee from Myanmar troops. They had to run from Buddhist mobs. Their villages were burned, they were attacked, civilians were killed, and the government claims that, clearance operations against the militants ended on the 5th of September 2017, but analysts and satellite imagery of the Human Rights Watch suggest hundreds of villages were destroyed after that time. So, although Myanmar had claimed to stop killing in the name of Buddha, they had continued. Presently, a leading United Nations human rights expert said that Myanmar's military is carrying out war crimes against ethnic minorities even during the COVID-19 pandemic. So, yeah, things are going down. And those of you who thought, oh, well, Buddhism is such a way of peace. No, it's not. It's not. War, genocide, and terrorism continue even in the Hindu faith. I'm telling you guys, I'm going on. I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm telling it all. So similarly, Hindu religious leaders have instigated religious hatred and intolerance in one of the world's largest populated countries, India. Now, with a population of over 1.3 billion and growing, the danger of religious states in such a populated region of the world goes without saying, right? Predominantly Hindu, religious minority groups, including Muslims and others, suffer under Hindu-inspired political policies. For example, in February of 2020, Al Jazeera reported that India's capital, New Delhi, experienced its worst communal violence targeting a religious minority in more than 30 years. The death toll was 43, prompting a lockdown in the northern part of Delhi following the violence. Reports confirmed that Muslims and others had been targets of lynchings by Hindu activists in the name of protecting cows, and a long-standing Hindu, which is obviously a long-standing Hindu nationalist preoccupation. The cows, they love the cows. I think they worship the cows as well, and many Hindu religious leaders have used it as an opportunity to lynch Muslims. The violence was triggered after Muslim protesting against discriminatory citizenship laws when they were, brought under question. Now, over 200 people were injured during 4 days of violence in the Muslim-populated area of northeast Delhi, as reports of Hindi police looking the other way as mobs went on a killing rampage, damaging property, including mosques, as reported in Al Jazeera. In other video posts on social media, you can see Muslims being beaten in the public by police officers, reportedly for being out during the COVID-19 pandemic. So there you go. There you have it. Even 2020, one, we're still seeing persecution of Muslims and other minorities in India, instigated by the Hindu majority. All right? Judaism. Not done yet. Let's move on to Judaism. Now, while anti-Semitic persecution of Jews persists, right? And it's horrible. The Jewish state of Israel has also been responsible for genocide, ethnic cleansing, and which is often backed by major political allies. Now, for those of you guys who have been kind of like seeing what's been happening with Israel right now, why is this such a huge issue in Israel? What's going on? Look at all the war. Look at all the fighting. It's 2021. What's going on? Why is no one saying anything? And I do apologize, you guys. There's a lot of background noise in the offices, but I'm going to keep going. I'm not stopping this report for nobody. So here it goes. So I'm going to get a little bit louder, you guys. So I apologize, but here we're going in. We're going hard. So between 1947 and 1949, at least 750,000 Palestinians from a 1.9 million population were made refugees beyond the borders of the state. Zionist forces had taken more than 78% of historic Palestine, ethnically cleansed and destroyed about 530 villages and cities, and killed about 15,000 Palestinians in a series of mass atrocities, including more than 70 massacres with the backing and support of its political allies, all in the name of, guess what? Drum roll, please. Religion. Okay. However, by 1919, Balfour wrote in a memorandum. Okay, I'm sorry, you guys. I don't jump to 1919. Let me go back to 1917 for a second. Now, this is when it all started. Because you say, well, when did all this start? Like, how did all this happen? Like, why is there so much religious persecution in Israel right now? And why is everybody silent about it? Okay, so here's the history, guys. It all started back on November 2nd, 1917. Britain Foreign Secretary Lord Balfour wrote a letter to the leader of the Zionist movement, Baron Rothschild. I'm not saying his name right. I'm going to spell it for you guys. Rothschild, Rothschild, stating that the government viewed with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and would use its best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of that objective. So, you guys, there was no Israel state in 1917, okay? It didn't exist. So, in just kind of FYI, in that letter, Balfour stated, nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine. So they said yes, we're going to give Israel their own state, but we're not going to take away the rights of those who are not Jews in Palestine. That was stated in 1917. Here's what happened in 1919, you guys. By 1919, Balfour wrote in a memorandum, in Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country. Zionism, be it right or wrong, is more important than the wishes of 700,000 Arabs. That is a quote. That is a quote from Balfour in 1919. He said, and I'm just going to read this again because I think it's important to understand how everything is transpiring and why religious persecution is still present and ongoing right now in Palestine. And I'll read it again. It says, in Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants of the country. Zionism, be it right or wrong, is more important than the wishes of 700,000 Arabs. Now, at that time, the Arab population made up some 94% of the population of Palestine. 94% of the population in Palestine was Arab. Okay, 1919. The Balfour Declaration and its implementation by the British Mandate in Palestine from 1920 culminated in Israel's creation in 1948 and the wholesale dispossession of the Palestinian people. So, Balfour Declaration, 1920, Israel as a state was created in 1948, okay? But it goes back to 1917, because back in 1917, before the start of the British Mandate, which didn't happen until 1920, the British issued the Balfour Declaration promising to help the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people. Now, what made the British Empire so keen on establishing an Israel state? So, why did the British Empire support that? Well, here it is. A Russian Zionist leader and chemist named Chaim Weizmann was well connected to the British government with friends in high places, right? Due to the contributions that he had, contributed during the British war effort during World War I. So for 2 years, Weizmann lobbied for the British to publicly commit to Britain to building a homeland for the Jewish people. So he lobbied for this for 2 years. Britain, please build the Jewish people a homeland. So by giving their support to Zionist goals in Palestine, the British hoped that they could shore up support among significant Jewish populations in the U.S. and Russia, and believed the Balfour Declaration would secure their control over Palestine. So with the help of Britain, Zionist immigration to Palestine commenced. So when the Nazis gained power in Germany between 33 and 36, the British Empire sent an estimated 60,000 European Jews to Palestine, seizing this as an opportunity to follow through with the Balfour Declaration for Israel to have a wholly religious independent sovereignty. Now, as a result, in 1936, Palestinian Arabs launched a large-scale uprising against the British and their support for the Zionist settlement colonism known as the Arab Revolt. So the British authorities crushed the revolt, which lasted until 1939. They crushed it violently. They destroyed at least 2,000 Palestinian homes, put 9,000 Palestinians in concentration camps, and subjected them to violent interrogation, including torture, and deported 200 Palestinian national leaders. So while Hitler was doing his concentration camps, Britain was doing their concentration camps in Palestine. So not surprisingly, Weizmann became Israel's first president, right? He was the one in Britain who had lobbied for the Jews to have their own state, so he became the first president. However, Britain soon became targets of Israel's Zionists, who declared war on Britain in 1944 for seeking to limit Jewish immigration. So Britain said, hey, well, we're going to make you a state in the Arab area. We're going to make you your own country. But Britain says, hey, we don't want you to send so many people so fast. So, I mean, Israel now is their own state, so Israel said, don't tell us who we can send and what we can do. We're going to declare war on you. So Israel declared war on Britain. No, Britain established the state, and then Israel turns around and declares war on them. It's ridiculous. But this is the world we're living in, right? Zionists quickly materialized and organized a number of attacks against the British, including the King David Hotel bombing in 1946, where British administrative headquarters were housed. So, Britain thought they was going to have their own little spot there. And the Zionists went and attacked that. And 91 people were killed in that attack, sadly. By 1947, the British government announced that it would be handing over the disaster that it created in Palestine to the United Nations, who on November 29, 1947, adopted Resolution 181, recommending that partitions of Palestine into Jewish and Arab states. Okay, here's what they did. So the UN took this case in 1947. So the UN said, okay, here's what we're going to do. UN said, we're going to give part of the country to the Arabs, and we're going to give part of the country to the Jews, right? So they gave 55% of the land to the Zionists, and they gave 6% of the land to the Arabs. Now, what makes that very strange is that at that particular time, most of the population was Arab. So, it was like 90% of the population in that area was Arab. So, and they only gave them 6% of the land. So, unsurprisingly, following the UN Resolution 181, war broke out between the Palestinian Arabs and Zionist armed groups who, unlike the Palestinians, had gained extensive training and arms from fighting alongside Britain in World War II. So obviously, Palestinians were no match for Israel, because Israel had the backing of Britain and they had weapons and things of that nature. So from December 1947 to mid-1948, Zionist armed groups expelled about 440,000 Palestinians from 220 villages. So they just took the land, right, with the UN backing. You guys, I state facts. I'm just saying, all in the name of what? Religion. Don't forget what the whole purpose of this podcast is for. So by May 15th, some of the most infamous massacres had already been committed, including the Baldat al-Shikid massacre on December 31st, 1947, killing up to 70 Palestinians, the Sasa massacre on February 14th, 1948, when 16 houses were blown up and 60 people lost their lives, and the Deir Yassin massacre on April 9th, 1948, when 110 Palestinian men and women and children were slaughtered. So between 1947 and 1949, at least 750,000 Palestinians from 1.9 million population were made refugees beyond the borders of the state. Zionist forces had taken more than 78% of the historic Palestine, ethnically cleansed and destroyed about 530 villages and cities, and killed 15,000 Palestinians in a series of mass atrocities, including more than 70 massacres with the backing and support of Britain and their political allies and done right under the nose of the United Nations. All done, remember, in the name of religion. Massacres and ethnic cleansings continue throughout the 20th and 21st century. I don't need to tell you that because you can turn to the news and you see what's happening over there right now. Today, Israel continues to oppress and dispossess the Palestinians. The 3 million Palestinians, if it's that many now, living in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem reportedly face home demolitions, arbitrary arrest, displacement. Their movement is restricted by military checkpoints and the separation wall that has obstructed their ability to travel freely. The Gaza Strip, that is home to some 2 million Palestinians, or at least was home to 2 million Palestinians, is probably not 2 million anymore after what's been taking place recently, has been under Israel's siege for over 10 years. According to activist groups, some 50 laws, here's the point, and here's why I'm telling you this is backed by religion, and if anybody tells you it's not, they're not telling you the truth. 50 laws are based on religious codes that discriminate against those who are not devout Jews. I'll read it again. According to activist groups, and these are the facts, some 50 laws are based on religious codes that discriminate against those who are not devout Jews. Those are the facts, and that's why I know this is religious-based. Okay, so every year on May 15, Palestinians around the world numbering 12.4 million mark the Nakba, or catastrophe, referring to the ethnic cleansing of Palestine that commenced in 1948. Palestinians observing the Nakba face criminal charges and risk death in Israel. It is clear from the present situation in the state of Israel that Jewish religious extremists and false ideologies are responsible for the genocide, ethnic cleansing, and war in that region, and that implementation of the established peace and security in that region, impediment, that it's an impediment. They are an impediment to the establishment of peace and security in that region because, right, it's based all on religion. And so we see that religion plays a major role in the conflict there to this day. So what's the conclusion, you guys? And if you want the real big conclusion, I definitely would encourage you guys to look at the podcast before this episode, because then I break it all down. But we're going to give a short conclusion here. The spike in religious violence is global and affects virtually every major religious group. Genocide, war, and hate crimes have all been the result of religiously incited violence that continues to plague mankind and pose a threat to the very survival of the human race. Left unchecked for far too long, religious majorities have often used their political influence to enact policies, laws, and actions systematically designed to oppress the religious minority. The tremendous assault of evil that they have imposed on the masses for centuries must not be allowed to continue. Our children, our grandchildren, our great-grandchildren, they're going to look back at this time in history and they're going to ask you, what did you do to change it? What did we do? Perhaps you want to consider this portion of this article, or even this portion of this podcast, as a final statement. You think of it as, prosecuting attorney and a judge, your jury. In this case, we appeal not to just anybody. We appeal to the minds and the hearts of our listeners right now, and to the courts that have been endowed with the responsibility to protect and defend the fundamental human rights of humanity, right? The governments and organizations designed to legally defend and uphold by force, if necessary, the rights to live in a world free from war, crime, and suffering. The global organization, who by their own admission and authority have stated in explicit terms that they will always do what's necessary to defend mankind from the evils of human pride, ambition, and corruption, to usher in a new world marked by unprecedented peace and security. Right? That's the United Nations. They say that. They say that they have established these legal laws. They have established these laws, these international laws, rather, that are supposed to be designed to protect the world from things that are happening right now. And they haven't done it yet. The United States, Britain, these international allies to the United Nations, you all hold a responsibility as well. We firmly believe that freedom of religion is a basic human right, and that freedom should be enjoyed by the masses under the present world conditions. However, can one exercise freedom of religion without the presence of a corrupt, organized institute that claims to be the spiritual teachers of their people? I'll say it a little slower. Can somebody still practice their religion freely without having to be subjected to an organized institution that stands in the way of peace and security? Yes, they can. So it must be stated and acknowledged that it is not a legal requirement for the aforementioned religious supporters to engage in acts of worship under the various institutions that have promoted mass murder, genocide, hate crimes, and that promoted sexual assault of women and children. So the point is that, you don't have to take away somebody's freedom to worship to hold their organization responsible for what they've done. I'll give you, maybe I can find an example that to help illustrate this point. So if the school district, like a district as a whole, like let's say a whole school district is responsible for, sexual abuse of children, right? Does that mean that every child that goes to that school district shouldn't be given an education? No. Education, they can still get an education somewhere else, right? Just that particular district needs to be shut down or rehauled or whatever, shut down, start a new one, whatever, right? And it's the same principle. So you have these religious organizations and institutes that have been designed and protected pedophilia, war, crime, terrorism, extremism. These institutions that do that, people can still worship freely if they want, but why are you leaving these institutions in place that continue to wreak so much havoc on mankind? It doesn't make any sense. It has nothing to do with freedom of religion. People can still worship freely, but with these entities gone, it's like, so why are they still here? It makes no sense. Like, what are you protecting? So according to the Human Rights Committee's laws, Articles 19, Section 3, and the 2011 General Comments, numbers 34 and 35, which state in part, when a state party invokes a legitimate grounds for restrictions of freedom of expression, it must demonstrate in specific and individualized fashion the precise nature of the threat. So, put it simply, it is within the right of each respective government to limit basic human rights to prevent a threat to their existence. In the case of mainstream religious organizations, not only are states at risk, humanity is at risk. Therefore, legally and internationally, human governments have full authority and responsibility, mind you, to restrict the operation of mainstream religious organizations that have acted in their best interest and against the interests of humanity, global peace, and security. So in other words, people still possess the ability to believe what they want to believe, practice their religious convictions, but instead of going to a corrupt organization that stands against human rights, they can do so at home. Therefore, we demand the United States, Great Britain, international allies, and the United Nations to take swift and immediate action against these mainstream religious organizations in these key areas, for only then will the world have any hope of ever attaining peace and security. Now, there is so much more I could say on this particular subject, but if you want to see the article in full, you guys, I strongly encourage you guys to actually go to the article on the website. When I tell you I break it down in full, all the articles that can be imposed, human rights articles that can be imposed against mainstream religious organizations right now, I'm telling you, I go in and I go hard. But you know what? Maybe I should just take a deep breath and tell you right now. All right, you guys, this is a lot. I only laugh because there's just so much information, you guys. It's like, oh my goodness. All right, here we go. I'm going to go in it, you guys. I'm going to go in it. I'm tired, but I'm going to do this. Let's see, where do I start? Okay, here we go. All right, recognize that mainstream religions pose a threat to the sovereignty of every nation under the globe. In addition, they pose a threat to humanity and the international interest of peace and security. We call on the United Nations I call, and I say we, speaking on behalf of Court Magazine, to immediately close all mainstream churches, temples, shrines, mosques, close the doors of these religions who have been found guilty of sexual abuse, human trafficking, promotion and facilitation of, human trafficking, all those who have shamelessly engaged in theft, public exploitation, money laundering practices, those who have instigated, condoned, and carried out genocide, terrorism, hate crimes, and the alike. Under Article 19, Article 2, and under the Declaration of Human Rights adopted by the United Nations on December of 1948 at the General Assembly in Paris, freedom of religion was guaranteed. However, under Article 19, Section 3, and the 2011 General Comments number 34, Section 35, gives all governments the freedom to limit the way in which these religions express their faith if they pose a threat to a sovereignty. In this particular case, mainstream religious organizations that make up the majority in a given country have long been responsible for genocide, mass murder, execution, rape, torture, and those belonging to religious minorities and even their own people, making their actions not only irreprehensible but also a violation of well-established international laws. By promoting the sexual abuse and human trafficking of children and women, they have defiantly stood against Article 4 that states in no uncertain terms that no one shall be held in servitude or slavery. By forcing and subjecting children and women to be participants in sex acts, mainstream religious organizations have subjected them to a form of sex slavery by both ignoring their cries for help and by protecting pedophiles and sex offenders amongst their leading ranks and expanding their sex and helping them to expand their quote-unquote sex slave ring when sending suspected sex offenders to other churches, temples, mosques after receiving substantiating accusations against these sexual predators for their misconduct. They are also in violation of Article 3 and 5 by robbing its own members and the international community of a safe and secure home, instead subjecting them to sexual torture and inhuman treatment without regards for their life, liberty, or rights. Also, they have defied Articles 7 through 30, denying lawful protection of a religious minority, subjecting them to genocide, terrorism, hate crimes, all in the name of religion and personal objectives for their quote-unquote holy wars. Now, time would literally fail me if I were to recount every incident in which mainstream religious organizations have violated Article 19 over the past 70 years without facing consequences from the United Nations. But to be fair, and I'm going to state this because to be fair, the United Nations doesn't really have the authority. Which is why I believe that every member of the United Nations needs to hand over the proper authority to the UN and give them the power to put an end to these religion's reign of terror on the international community. So we therefore demand, once the United Nations gets the power that they need from human governments, which will need to, from global governments rather, which they will need to get the power first before they can do this. Once they get the power, here's what we demand. We demand the immediate closure of all churches, temples, shrines, mosques who have willfully violated the Declaration of Human Rights, Article 19. They broke the law, close them, period. We also demand that the United Nations immediately prohibit religious involvement in political affairs and demand that political entities immediately cut ties with religious entities, including the Vatican, the Russian Orthodox Church, and other religious organizations that have used their religious influence to persecute the religious minority. Their political involvement must be eliminated under the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights, articles adopted by the UN in 1966. Articles 18 states that the freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subjected only to such limitations as prescribed by law and are necessary to protect public safety, order, health, morals of the fundamental rights and freedoms of others. Hello, 2021. Can we not see that this is now a necessity? In that mainstream religious organizations who make up the majority of the state's population have used their power and influence to persecute, murder, rape, and engage in bloody warfares, it's vital at this point for the survival of humanity that those religious organizations have limits to their freedom, specifically revoking their participation in political matters both locally, nationally, and internationally. It is both prudent and vital that political leaders cut ties with mainstream religious organizations if the world will ever see the dawn of a new day under truly peaceful conditions. I'm not done. We further demand that the United Nations prohibit commercial gain and profit in the name of religion. Now, if you guys want to get more on that, stay tuned for my next episode and article. So here it goes. Here, I'm going to say it again just so that you guys get the point. We further demand that the United Nations prohibit commercial gain and profit in the name of religion, as it is both morally and ethically wrong and a form of shameless exploitation of the masses. It also works against human rights and serves to divide peoples, communities, cultures, and countries, and has posed a real threat to peace and security around the globe. Now, under Articles 20 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, it clearly states that everyone is entitled to a social and international order in which the rights and freedoms set forth in the Declaration can be fully realized. When commercial entities appeal to the emotional side of religious members to sell their products or services, they are significantly impeding the development of human rights internationally. Those commercial practices work on isolating the religious minority, inciting religious fanaticism, and have been used to promote religious intolerance, hate, genocide, and hate crimes around the world. You can't imprison a pedophile and then legally distribute his images of child pornography. It would make you culpable and in violation of the law. In a similar way, not only must mainstream religious organizations be held accountable for their crimes against humanity, no one should be allowed to make any commercial profit from the paraphernalia that has launched the world into one of the most heinous and bloodiest conflicts in the 20th and 21st century. Any country representative or business leader should be heavily fined and penalized by failing to comply with adherence to the present or new articles under the UN addressing these very issues. It will require courage and a true commitment to humanity and global peace and security for the UN to rise up to the challenge and change and affect global change. UN members who are unwilling to support such a monumental move in the best interest of global peace and security should be immediately banned from the organization and penalized accordingly until they are willing to fight for human rights with the rest of the world. The United States and Britain must lead the global change to fully establish their role as international leaders who are and who may want to have that role at ushering in a new era of international peace and security. Therefore, the removal of all major religious organizations that stand in opposition to human rights is vital for the survival of humanity, but also for the survival of the United Nations and their core objectives. It is vital for international safety of our children, our women, and our freedoms. It is vital to end the wars, the supposed quote-unquote holy wars, genocide, mass murder, rape, sexual assault, and so many more evils religious leaders and organizations have instigated, condoned, and carried out in the 20th and 21st century. Now that the jury and the judge have been presented with all the facts, it's now up to them. Go to your chambers, to the privacy of your own homes. Go to your UN retreats, deliberate, say what you need to say, but we are extremely confident, though, obviously, that when you come back to deliver your verdict against these mainstream religious organizations, the verdict will be guilty as charged on account of mainstream religious organizations instigating genocide, mass murder, war, and hate crimes. The United Nations must find the defendants guilty on the account of mainstream religious organizations facilitating, condoning, and carrying out acts of sex slavery, child sexual exploitation against not only children but also women as well, right? The United Nations and members should find the defendants guilty. The world over will rejoice in your verdict, and it will usher in the dawn of a new era in the world. It will truly be a fight and a step in the right direction for international peace and security. But will the United Nations rise to the challenge? Will they prevail? The decision is, of course, something that they must themselves decide. But we're so close, so I believe that they will indeed. You see, the world has changed on sexual pedophilia and hatred, and people are changing. People are starting to see that it's not right, and they're starting to speak up, and they're starting to say things. And so I believe that the United Nations will stand up and do the right thing. And I believe that UN members will lend their power and support to the UN to give them the power that they need to put an end to mainstream religious organizations' reign of terror on humanity. That being the case, you guys, for the full article, you guys can always visit this at courtmagazine.org. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, say what you got to say. But like I said, I will always tell the truth, irregardless. You guys already know that. That being the case, you guys stay safe. Next time I hop on a podcast for this particular segment, we're going to talk about the economic advantage to ending the reign of terror of mainstream religious organizations. The economic advantage. Now we're talking about money. All right, you guys. So stay tuned for that. Until next time, I'm JosephBonner saying, always tell the truth.